بأن أعلن لكم
Syria's President Bashar al-Assad secures a landslide victory in the country's presidential elections, winning over 88% of the vote. Iran commemorates the 25th anniversary of the passing of the founder of the Islamic Revolution, Ayatollah Imam Ruhollah al-Khomeini. The US and Russia trade blame over the worsening violence in Ukraine as the West gears up for more sanctions against Moscow. And the renegade Libyan General Khalifa Haftar vows a strong response after escaping an assassination attempt. Good evening and welcome to Al-Ittishaf World News. I'm Maryam Khaddad. Well, Syria's Speaker of Parliament, Mohammed al-Laham, announced that Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has won the country's first multi-candidate presidential elections with 88.07% of the votes, giving Assad a third term.
أن المحكمة الدستورية العليا
I announce to you that the High Constitutional Court is done with the final results of the Syrian presidential elections for the year 2014 as follows. First of all, the number of eligible voters inside and outside of Syria was 15,845,575 votes. Secondly, the number of voters who voted inside and outside of Syria was 11,634,412 voters, which is 73.42% of those who cast their ballots. Meanwhile, the number of invalid votes was 442,108, with 3.8% of the voters. And the number of votes each of the candidates got accordingly. In first place, Dr. Bashar al-Assad with 10,319,723 votes, that is 88.7% of valid votes.
Our correspondent Hussein al-Moussawi is standing by for us in the Syrian capital for the latest updates on Syria's presidential elections. Hussein, it is good to see you. We have been hearing some false reports that you and your cameraman have been attacked. Can you clarify, please?
Yes, Mariam, unfortunately there was those reports that circulated, especially in the Syrian media, that me and my cameraman Hussein Ayed, we were apparently attacked, or that's false, and it's just part, as we were told we were also interviewed by the Syrian State TV that came here to the hotel, and they took pictures of us, and just to clarify and make sure that we're fine, they told us, the Syrian State TV, that it's part of a propaganda against President Bashar al-Assad to show the world that the celebrity, the fireworks and the gunfire on the streets has killed us. No, we're okay and everything's good.
All right, well, that's good to hear. Now, can you just give us a mood on the ground following the announcement of these results?
Yes, well, the mood has been, I mean, it's wild on the streets of Damascus today. I mean, ever since the election, the announced were results with Bashar al-Assad winning a third term with 88.7%. People were waiting for that announcement, as I said before in the bulletin. People waiting, and they went onto the streets. So they weren't let down. They voted with their blood, and Bashar al-Assad did win as they expected. I was on the streets around an hour ago when the results were announced. There was people shooting. There was a lot of gunfire, fireworks, cars. Until now, as I speak now, on the other side of this neighborhood, on the Maidan area or the Sahat Sissin area, those neighborhoods which are known to be like the downtown of Damascus, celebrations are still continuing now, and I think the celebrations will continue until the early hours of the morning. People wanted to, the Syrian people had a word to say, they had a responsibility to uphold, and they all chose Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, and he won. So I guess the celebrations are due to continue for quite some time, maybe until the early hours of the morning. The people are very excited, they have a lot of pride. They say that these elections were democratic and they chose their president, and their president hopefully will not let them down.
And have there been any signs of irregularities in these elections?
Sorry?
Have there been any signs of irregularities in the elections?
Well, it's early to say now at the moment because we still haven't really received any reports on that issue. However, as we heard before the press conference by the Parliament Speaker, there was a press conference before that by the High Electoral Commission that's managed by the judges in the country, and they said that only after a week from now they will they will give us more details on that after they do the full assessments and all the information is released. So we don't really know until this moment. We don't really know. We're going to just have to wait until the High Electoral Council, who is managed by the judges in the country, the High Judiciary, will announce anything.
Well, what is the impression you are getting from residents concerning John Kerry and other Western politicians' denouncement of this democratic process as a farce?
Well, you know, the US, this is not the first time the US or any Western states have criticized whether it is the Syrian government or President Bashar al-Assad himself. So the Syrian people really, as I said before, the Syrian people really don't listen anymore to Western leaders, and especially American leaders, especially after the red line that President Obama drew around 8-9 months ago when he said he wanted to wage a war on Syria, and he wanted to shell Syria with bombs and that. So the Syrian people are not really afraid. They don't really care. As I spoke to them, they don't really care what the West cares anymore, what the West says. They say, we chose our president, he's our president, we showed the world this image of democracy. Whatever the world could say, they can say. And I need to mention here that the Syrian government did receive other support. I mean, you have the US and some Western states calling this whole democratic process as a sham or as a disgrace, as the US official said. However, we had I think it was 9 or 10 country delegation that visited Damascus 2 days ago, and today there was the final statement, and the delegation was headed by Alauddin Bourajardi, an Iranian official, and they voiced their support for this process, and they said that the final statement, the main important factor in the final statement was that whatever the West says, the people of Syria, they chose their people, and we as the 10 countries, we say that President Bashar al-Assad is legitimate. I remember it was Iran, South Korea, Brazil, many other states. They all had a press conference today and said that Bashar al-Assad is legitimate. Though they came to support the president, they came to support the Syrian people. The Syrian people are on the street celebrating. They know that the Syrian people went out in millions to choose their president, and there was no fraud or any complaints, as we heard in the press conference by the Parliament Speaker. So, and you can also see in the scenes on the street. So the people, answering your question, the people don't really care what the West says anymore, because the West is always interfering, as they say, and they know that the West will always let them down. So they want to take matters in their own hands, and they did on the 3rd of June, and now we have a new president, which the Syrians say they chose, not the West.
Well, does there seem to be a growing challenge of legitimacy in these polls, especially given that a large portion of the population was not able to participate?
Well, what we know that let me just quote what Laham just said. Laham said that the turnout was over 70%. And what we also know that around 80% of Syrian territory did vote. And what we also know that most of the embassies, I think it was only 4 or 5 embassies that really closed the doors to voters. So we can say only around 2 to 3 million didn't vote, which is a small number in comparison to 15 million or 16 million. And also the government did give them many chances. As I said before, there was an extension of the voting times, giving a chance for those that live in other neighborhoods which are under military control to leave their neighborhoods. And also it did speak to them a couple of weeks ago before the elections were held, and it did tell them, those living in Raqqa, those living in parts of Aleppo, those living in parts of Daraa, you have the chance to leave that neighborhood and come vote in other neighborhoods. However, those who did not, and the government said clearly, if you don't want to vote, then we're going to just cancel you. We're not even going to put you part of the equation. And that was the issue. So there was 15 million eligible voters, 11 million voted. I think in any democracy in the world, if you have that number, 75% is pretty good. We're seeing elections in the US. We're seeing elections in Britain. I don't think the number is any close to that. So having around 70% 70 to 75% turnout is pretty large, and I don't think anyone could really tackle that number now.
All right, Hussein, it's good to see you. Thanks a lot for all those updates. Millions of Iranians have commemorated the 25th anniversary of the passing of the leader of the Islamic Revolution, Imam Ruhollah Khomeini. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, addressed a ceremony in Tehran in which he paid tribute to the founder of modern-day Iran. Our Tehran correspondent, Hussein Dabash, has that story.
Iranians are marking the 25th anniversary of the passing of the late founder of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Ayatollah Imam Ruhollah Khomeini. At his shrine in the Iranian capital Tehran, millions gathered to pay tribute to the late leader of the Iranian Revolution that brought down the US-backed Shah back in 1979. Inside the mausoleum, the successor of Imam Khomeini, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, made a speech in which he hailed Imam Khomeini and his school of thought.
In Imam Khomeini's school of thought, the power gained out of forgery and force is unacceptable. However, any authority resulting from public elections is meaningful. External threats challenging Iran remain the troublemaking of global arrogance. Frankly speaking, that of the United States. The US government is known for its efforts to sow discord among leaderships and foment coups d'etats and color revolutions. 35 years after its establishment, the Islamic Republic of Iran has been facing the world domineering powers. Despite all this, years of troublemaking by the US has not broken the Islamic Republic, which must face head-on its challenges at home and abroad.
Sayyid Khamenei also touched upon some of the issues the region faces today.
Unfortunately, some regional countries do not take heed of the dangers of takfiri groups which will threaten them in the future, and they are still backing these groups. Some regional countries are backing the takfiri groups and supporting their massacres in Syria. Eventually, these countries will be forced to eradicate these extremists with a high price.
The speech was witnessed by tens of thousands of people, including Iranian officials and foreign guests paying tribute to the late founder of the Islamic Republic. Meanwhile, men, women, and children from all walks of life could be seen at the vicinity of Imam Khomeini's mausoleum paying their respects.
The late Imam Khomeini helped the poor people by fighting for our rights. Imam Khomeini rose up not just for the people of Iran, but the whole world. I am here to pay tribute to this great man.
Imam Khomeini taught us the true meaning of Islam, the one that was brought down from the heavens to earth, not the former regime's version which abused the words of Allah. I came here with my family to pay tribute to this great man because he freed our country from 2,500 years of monarchy rule.
Imam Khomeini is known for inspiring millions in Iran and across the world by leading the biggest Islamic revolution in modern times. Imam Khomeini passed away 25 years ago and to this day is remembered as a prominent figure that reshaped Iran's political and social structure. Every year on the passing away of the late founder of the Islamic Republic of Iran, this scene is all too familiar throughout Iran. The fact that it has lasted for 25 years after the death of Imam Khomeini only shows that Iranians still hold strong to this man and the ideals of his revolution that continue to shape not only the region, but the whole world. Reporting for AEE TV, Hussein Dabash, Tehran.
Dr. Fawad Izadi, a professor at Tehran University, joins us now for more on this commemoration of the historic Islamic figure. Dr. Izadi, can you just tell us how far has Iran come in the 25 years since Imam Khomeini's death?
Well, I think Iran has come a long way. When Imam Khomeini passed away, Iran was just coming out of the war that was imposed on it. The country's economy was not doing well, and the country was weak in terms of being able to defend itself. After 25 years, we have a situation where economic pressures are there, political pressures are there, but the country is able to defend itself. The country is able to advance technologically under pressure. This was one of the themes that Ayatollah Khamenei mentioned today, the fact that the Islamic Republic continues to prosper under pressure, and this is somewhat different from other places in the world where they may have good relations with the US, but that good relation does not bring them any benefit in reality. Being independent, having a popular demand from the people, and following the Islamic law in terms of country's affairs has made Iran a model in terms of being able to prosper while adversaries want to destroy it. And the more Iran prospers, the more it will be considered as a model internationally that is showing other people around the world that it's possible to do this.
So has the Islamic Revolution been successful in navigating the region out of economic and diplomatic isolation?
The idea is not really to have good relations with countries like United States or Israel. That is not considered diplomatic isolation in the minds of Iranian people or Iranian government officials. The importance of independence, the importance of a foreign policy that serves the people of Iran has priority. And when a country has a foreign policy like that, a domestic policy like that, then obviously some governments in the world, including the United States, are not going to be happy. They are going to pressure the country that is taking that independent route. And this is expected. These are arrogant powers. They want other parts of the world to be in obedience. And when a country does not follow their line, they cause difficulties. So the idea is not to follow the line of governments that want to advance their own benefits without benefiting the people of this part of the world. The idea is to prosper, and if that situation is causing difficulties for countries like United States, that's not going to be a priority for people of Iran. Iran had very good relations with the US during the Shah's time, but that good relation was generally in the benefit of the United States and caused difficulties for people of Iran. So having that experience, I think that's one of the reasons people had a revolution, and that's why people up to today, 30 some years after the revolution, are supporting the Islamic government.
So the Islamic Republic is now leading the fight against extremism. How does this affect Imam Khomeini's vision for unity among Muslims?
Well, this is one of the themes that Ayatollah Khamenei mentioned today. Yes, extremism is causing difficulties for people of this region, but we understand in Iran, he was saying, that these extremist groups are being directed by outside powers, by countries like the United States. So he was saying today that we consider the real enemy to be the United States, and the unfortunate situation where groups of people who claim to be Islamic are causing difficulties, are not following the Islamic rules and regulations, are killing innocent people in some cases. we blame the United States that's behind these type of activities. So he was cautioning his audience that what Iran should not do is to consider these organizations to be the real enemy. He said that Iran will defend itself if it's attacked, but Iran is realizing that who the real enemy is and is going to concentrate on that real enemy. And what the US wants is actually for Iran to not to take this route. The US wants to create infighting within the Muslim world. US wants to create disunity within the Muslim world. And Ayatollah Khamenei today was saying that we are not going to be fooled by that policy. We are going to actually realize who is behind these organizations, and we are going to concentrate on the real enemy.
All right, Dr. Fawad Izadi, a professor at Tehran University. It was a pleasure having you join us. Thanks a lot. The United States has welcomed Iran's recent efforts to alleviate concerns about its nuclear program. On the sidelines of the IAEA Board of Governors meeting, the U.S. delegate to the IAEA told journalists that the steps being taken by Iran mark good progress. A recent report by the UN atomic watchdog found that Iran was sticking to its agreements with the agency.
All issues past and present are going to have to be resolved.
That's a precondition.
It's not a precondition, it is the process. I mean, so I wouldn't say before anything else this will occur. This is part of that process. It's integral to that process. We use that phrase, no deal is better than a bad deal. Good. That's a good way of putting it. The other one is the best deal is the deal that addresses all of the issues that had to be addressed in order to resolve this. So a good, steady approach and an ambitious deadline is worth having. That's what we are still focused on.
G7 leaders are in Brussels for a two-day summit aimed at tossing up more sanctions against Russia over its position on Ukraine. This comes only days ahead of celebrations marking D-Day, where world leaders, including the Russian president, will head to France.
The irony of old allies becoming enemies and old enemies becoming friends will be the talk of the town when world leaders meet in the French region of Normandy to mark the 70th anniversary of D-Day. But before US President Barack Obama comes face-to-face with his Russian counterpart, President Vladimir Putin, on Friday, tensions are already heating up. G7 leaders are in Brussels for a two-day summit which for the first time in 17 years will be held without Russia. Tossing up sanctions against Moscow over its position in Ukraine will dominate the talks. But before heading to the Belgian capital, Obama stood in Warsaw, warning Russia that the world is united against what he called its dark tactics to violate Ukraine's sovereignty.
After investing so much blood and treasure to bring Europe together, how can we allow the dark tactics of the 20th century to define this new century?
This was only one day after the US president unveiled a $1 billion security plan for Eastern Europe. President Obama also held his first extended meeting with Ukraine's president-elect Petro Poroshenko. In those talks, Obama offered the confectionery tycoon, who has vowed to crush pro-Russian separatists in eastern Ukraine, $5 million in military assistance.
And now we feel that friend in need is a friend indeed. The American position of the American people is very valuable for us. Point number two is that from the very beginning, from the first day of inauguration, we are ready to present the plan for peaceful regulation, the situation on the East. And we think that the next several days would be very important, crucial for the Ukrainian history and for Ukrainian perspective.
For his part, the Russian president accused the US administration of hypocrisy in what he called aggressive attempts to isolate Russia over its position on Ukraine. We have almost no military forces abroad yet. Look everywhere in the world. There are American military bases, American troops, thousands of kilometers from their borders. They interfere in the interior affairs of this or that country, so it is difficult to accuse us of abuses. Although President Obama has no formal plans to meet with Putin in 2 days' time, leaders of Britain, France and Germany will hold one-on-one talks with the Russian president. For his part, Putin has hinted that he is ready for dialogue with his US counterpart. Making these two leaders sit on one table may be the best solution for Ukraine, as the conflict begins to take on an increasingly bloody dimension.
The fight for Ukraine's east has killed hundreds while forcing thousands to flee their homes. Meanwhile, the Kiev government says it has killed more than 300 pro-Russian activists in its so-called anti-terrorist operations in the eastern city of Slavyansk.
As fighting rages on for a second straight day in Ukraine's eastern city of Slavyansk between government forces and pro-Russian separatists, more of its residents are forced to flee their homes. The population of 130,000 people is decreasing by the day. Families in Slavyansk are leaving to less violent areas in the country's east. They take with them only as much as they could carry.
We hastily packed our stuff, the most important things, what we need, and we are leaving. But where to, we don't know. We have some plans, we have chosen a direction, it will be through Russia. No doubt we have to leave Ukraine. There is no future here for the children or for us. I don't see anything good happening here.
In the last 24 hours, 300 people have been killed in Kiev's so-called anti-terrorist operations. Although the government says all those killed are rebels, troops are increasingly targeting innocent civilians.
The Ukrainian troops are shelling Slavyansk. They do not shoot positions of self-defense units. They shoot at residential areas wherever the barrel of their gun is pointing. That's it.
This amateur video shows a local hospital and a train station being shelled in a town near Slavyansk. At least one person was killed and another wounded in those attacks. This footage shows a deadly explosion hitting the administrative building headquarters in the eastern city of Luhansk on Tuesday, killing at least 8 civilians. But it's not just the pro-Russian activists who are feeling the pinch. Reports indicate that self-defense fighters shot down 2 army helicopters. As the West continues to support Ukraine's new president-elect, who has vowed to crush what he calls terrorists in the east. For the time being, it looks like more innocent civilians will be fleeing the increasingly bloody conflict.
At the opening of that G7 summit, the EU announced that it is ready to organize talks next month to set up a donors conference for the new government in Ukraine.
Coordinate international support to Ukraine. In response to a growing need for international coordination, an European Union-led international donor coordination platform is being set up.
Do stay with us here at Eletija World News, coming up after the break. Beijing dismisses Western criticism of its crackdown on Tiananmen Square, protesters 25 years ago. Welcome back. Let's have another look at the top stories we're following.
بأن أعلن لكم
Syria's President Bashar al-Assad secures a landslide victory in the country's presidential elections, winning over 88% of the vote. Iran commemorates the 25th anniversary of the passing of the founder of the Islamic Revolution, Ayatollah Imam Ruhollah al-Khomeini. The US and Russia trade blame over the worsening violence in Ukraine as the West gears up for more sanctions against Moscow. And the renegade Libyan General Khalifa Haftar vows a strong response after escaping an assassination attempt. Following an assassination attempt on the life of former Army General Khalifa Haftar, a full-scale military operation has been announced against militant groups as Libya descends towards a civil war.
Libya is on the verge of a civil war after renegade General Khalifa Haftar announced a nationwide full-scale military operation against militants following an assassination attempt on his life. A suicide bomber blew himself up at a base used by Haftar. 3 of his guards were killed in the attack in the eastern town of Abyar. It is the first attack against Haftar since an offensive dubbed Operation Dignity was launched, aimed at eradicating extremists from Benghazi. The development came as violence escalated in the eastern city of Benghazi between forces loyal to the general and extremist militias, including the Al-Qaeda-linked Ansar al-Sharia. Since the military operation began, life has been brought to a standstill in the city, home to several oil companies. The government, rival militia brigades and political factions rejected Haftar's offensive against militants as an attempted coup, after his forces also stormed the parliament a week ago. The Islamist-led parliament has done little to quell the rise of extremists in the North African nation. In fact, parties have used their military muscle for political gains. Libya's 5th Prime Minister since the ouster of dictator Muammar Gaddafi 3 years ago, Ahmed Mu'aitek, who came to power with the help of armed fighters, said earlier in the week that his government will lead the fight against extremists.
As the government starts its duties, we are committed to protect our people. We will take the responsibility of implementing security all over the country and fight the terror and extremists strictly. Extremism is not accepted from any party, and fighting it away from the government will increase the problem and will split the Libyan society that could be difficult to fix later.
It is unclear how this government will fight extremists in Libya, as the increase in violence will most likely only hamper parliamentary elections slated for June 25.
Just hours after launching several airstrikes on Houthi targets in the northern Yemeni province of Amran, the Yemeni government announced that a ceasefire agreement had been reached between the government and the Houthi group.
Shiite Houthi fighters have taken control of Bet Bedi and Shibel areas in Yemen's northern Amran region, where at least 7 pro-government Islah militants and 2 Houthis were killed. As battles continued, Yemen's Air Force intervened to back the army's ally, the Islah Party, by raiding positions held by Houthi rebels, also known as Ansarullah, south of Amran city. Following fierce clashes, Yemen's defense ministry announced a ceasefire agreement between government troops and Houthi fighters in Amran. This came following a televised address late on Tuesday, in which Houthi leader Abdel Malik al-Houthi expressed his readiness to agree with government forces on an immediate ceasefire in Amran in return for exchanging military troops with what he described as neutral forces to provide security in the region. Yemen's Houthi movement, which draws its name from its founder, Hussein Badr al-Din al-Houthi, has been fighting the central government for years. Houthis blame the government for political, economic, and religious marginalization of the country's Shia community and violating civil rights. On Monday, dozens were killed after warplanes and troops attacked positions held by Houthis in Amran province. Similar clashes have repeatedly broken out over the past several months between government forces and the Shiite fighters. Now as Sana'a struggles to restore nationwide control over a country plagued by divisions, it remains to be seen if the government can meet the demands of the Houthis, who have long called for their rights to be respected.
Let's get our Sana'a correspondent Mohammed Al-Attab on the line now to discuss this further. Mohammed, is there any doubt among Yemenis that this ceasefire will be maintained, especially since it followed such intense clashes between armed forces and Houthi fighters?
Yes, there is a great doubt that this kind of ceasefire is a fragile one, especially that today's demonstration has highlighted this situation, because when they tried to stage this demonstration, the protesters were attacked, and even though they have made their way toward the president's office, and we have delivered a speech there and a statement in which they have called on President Hadi to address the root causes of this kind of conflict. They meant that the root causes of this conflict is that some of the military army units are affiliated to a specific group, which are Islamic militants who belong to the Islah party. So they have also confirmed the message which was sent by the leader of the Houthi movement, in which he called on the government to replace those who are affiliated to the militants to other units which are not affiliated to any group or partisan or party.
All right, Mohammed Al-Attab, our Sana'a correspondent, thanks a lot for all of those updates.
Thank you.
A deadly wave of attacks across Iraq, including twin car bombings, has left at least 21 people killed and more than 50 others wounded, as a year-long surge in violence shows no signs of a letting up. The attacks targeted areas in and around the capital Baghdad, as well as in the Salahuddin and Kirkuk provinces to its north, all afflicted by near-daily bloodshed. In the day's deadliest incident, 2 vehicles rigged with explosives went off in the center of Kirkuk, killing 8 people and wounding 9. Outside the city of Ramadi, west of the capital, a suicide bomber detonated himself among a group of people, killing 8 and wounding 14 others. In the capital, a car bomb killed 4 people in a busy shopping area, while separate bomb attacks in different districts left 4 others dead. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has instructed his security cabinet to speed up discussions on a bill that will allow the force-feeding of Palestinian detainees on hunger strike. The bill, which has already passed its first reading in the Knesset, awaits votes on its second and third readings. The hunger strike, which has gone on for 40 days, has gained momentum among Palestinians in indefinite detention. Officials of the Palestinian Prisoners Club warned that anger is growing on the Palestinian street with each passing day, materializing into larger protest rallies across Palestinian cities. Turkish security forces fired tear gas and water cannon at Kurds protesting plans to build military barracks in the southeast of the country. The soldiers launched the operation in the early hours of the morning to break up a 12-day sit-in by some 400 protesters in the Lais district of a Kurdish-majority province, in an effort to end demonstrations which have spread across the region. Egypt's election commission has officially announced former Army Chief Abdel Fattah al-Sisi as the winner of the country's presidential elections.
President-elect Abdel Fattah al-Sisi took a sweeping 96.9% of the vote in an election held nearly a year after he toppled President Mohamed Morsi, whose allies boycotted the polls.
And based on what was put forward, the winner of the presidential election is Mr. Abdel Fattah al-Sisi.
The official turnout stood at 47.5% of the country's 53 million eligible voters during the three-day vote. Some opposition movements, however, have placed the voter turnout at about 11%. Several thousand people in Cairo's Tahrir Square celebrated Tuesday's announcement. Fireworks erupted overhead as vendors sold Egyptian flags and balloons donning pictures of Sisi. Military and security personnel watched from the edges as people expressed their excitement and joy.
I don't know how to express my excitement. As you can see, Egyptians are celebrating Sisi's presidential victory.
I am very happy that Sisi is elected as the president. I don't want the Muslim Brotherhood to be back again. I support Sisi.
The United States said Wednesday it will work with Egyptian President-elect Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, but urged him to carry out human rights reforms. In a statement released by the White House, officials said President Barack Obama will speak with the former army chief in the coming days. Earlier, Sisi's close supporter, Saudi Arabia's King Abdullah, was the first world leader to congratulate the former army chief. Sisi won the election over his only rival, leftist politician Hamdin Sabahi, who criticized the vote, saying it lacked credibility. Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood movement and pro-democracy groups boycotted the election, a move that apparently led to a lower turnout than the election that brought ousted President Mohamed Morsi to power. Sisi's presidency places Egypt back in the hands of a military strongman, just 3 years after a popular uprising against former dictator Hosni Mubarak.
The Taliban has released a video of the dramatic moments when gun-toting militants handed over Army Sergeant Bo Bergdahl to U.S. Special Forces. Bergdahl was the only U.S. soldier held by the Taliban after being captured in Afghanistan. He was freed last Saturday in exchange for 5 senior Taliban militants detained at Guantanamo Bay as part of a deal brokered by Qatar. Meanwhile, U.S. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham has added his voice to other officials, questioning both the timing and motive behind the release of a U.S. Army sergeant in exchange for the 5 Taliban prisoners.
I don't know if that will withstand scrutiny, but you got to understand what's going on. They had a Rose Garden ceremony with the man's parents. I think the White House was looking at a twofer to announce in 1 week that we're going to withdraw from Afghanistan, ending the longest war in U.S. history. And oh, by the way, as Commander-in-Chief, I secured the last captive of that war, the only captive of that war. That was thought in their mind, I think, to be a pretty good political story for that week. It blew up in their face. So the question is, was this release designed to enhance the announcement to withdraw from Afghanistan, getting the one guy back? Or was it based on a circumstance that was so compelling, this was the moment and only this moment? That's what we need to investigate.
Was it where? Kuwaiti Prime Minister Sheikh Jabir al-Sabah met with the Chinese President Xi Jinping for talks in Beijing on the second and last day of his visit to China. The two officials sat down to hold talks in the presence of both Kuwaiti and Chinese delegates. Sheikh Sabah had met with the Chinese Prime Minister on Tuesday to discuss expanding their scope of economic and energy cooperation. At a signing ceremony hosted by the two leaders, both countries' petroleum corporations signed a memorandum to deepen trade in crude oil and petroleum. China has rejected international criticism of its decision to crack down on protesters in Tiananmen Square 25 years ago. Beijing's comments come ahead of commemorations marking the 25th anniversary of the protests which presented the biggest challenge to communist rule in China.
He is famous around the world and at the same time anonymous. The man who stood alone Blocking a column of tanks at Tiananmen Square is still celebrated as a symbol of peaceful protest and defiance a quarter of a century later. But for Beijing's foes, the anniversary marking the biggest challenge to Communist Party rule in China is a great opportunity to criticize the Chinese authorities over their human rights record.
We very clearly called on the Chinese authorities to release all the activists, journalists, and lawyers who have been detained ahead of the 25th anniversary, which, as you said, is tomorrow. Look, this is something we've been very clear about. China is a growing country. We've talked a lot about the fact that this is not a zero-sum game here, and as they grow, I think it's time to allow some more space, quite frankly, for discussion in their own country, particularly around this kind of anniversary.
For its part, Beijing has rejected international criticism of its crackdown on student-led pro-democracy protests around Tiananmen Square on its 25th anniversary.
We demand the US side respect China's judicial sovereignty and not make irresponsible comments on issues that are related to China's internal affairs. Also, the statement released by United Nations Human Rights Chief recently is a grave violation of her authority. It has seriously infringed upon China's sovereignty and internal affairs. We express resolute opposition.
As China imposed strict security measures in central Beijing, Hong Kong geared up to commemorate the anniversary.
I think every person in Hong Kong commemorates today the 4th of June. Why? I think as a history for Chinese people.
Meanwhile, on the streets of Beijing, some residents dismissed the event as too overrated.
As long as there are people, those things always happen. History cannot be avoided. All we can do is live in the present. Right now we're very happy, very content. I was very young back then. Who was right and who was wrong? Well, history will be the judge of that.
I think that kind of incident you mentioned will not happen again, because it's meaningless. Making a fuss about it for such a long time is completely meaningless. Because China's system is certainly different from the West. The population is huge. There are 1.4 billion people. So if you want to govern it well, it's not easy.
Many others avoided direct comments on the occasion.
No, I don't know. Well, how do you put it? Sorry, I can't take this interview.
Although the anniversary is commemorated every year, many see the events of Tiananmen Square massacre as a thing of the past, with a new China emerging over the years, evolving into one of the world's biggest economies with a stable political system.
You've been watching Al-Attijah World News with me, Mariam Khaddad. Here's a recap of our headlines. Syria's President Bashar al-Assad secures a landslide victory in the country's presidential elections, winning over 88% of the vote. Iran commemorates the 25th anniversary of the passing of the founder of the Islamic Revolution, Ayatollah Imam Ruhollah al-Khomeini. The US and Russia trade blame over the worsening violence in Ukraine as the West gears up for more sanctions against Moscow. And the renegade Libyan General Khalifa Haftar vows a strong response after escaping an assassination attempt. That's it for this bulletin. Have a good night.